The world of Eloria is one of fantasy, but framed in theology, starting with the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. In the mythology of this series, Eloria was one of 7 worlds created by the destruction of the Great Flood, with parts of the human world splintering into 7 separate realms connected by hidden gateways. Before the creation of the human world, known as Midland, the King of the Law made powerful beings of light, known as angels or 𝐏𝐢𝐻𝐸𝐻. But after the creation of man, the most beautiful of these angels became jealous, desiring to be equal with God. He convinced mankind to sin, and creation itself was corrupted. His name was Abaddon, and he was made formless for his lies, cursed to wander the earth as a spirit, along with his followers, a third of the angelic host. But he swore to one day take the king's throne of Arabothe, the most beautiful world, the centre of all creation. Free will was both a blessing and a curse to humanity, but the King of the Law would never forsake his children. Almost 500 years later, 200 beings of light lusted after the daughters of men and took for themselves human wives, who bore abominable children, the first of the Nephilim giants. The 𝐏𝐢𝐻𝐸𝐻 taught their wives the making of charms and enchantments, and taught their offspring how to make weapons. The giants defiled and devoured humanity. They even sinned against the animals, creating numerous tribes of abominations. Some of these tribes pledged their allegiance to their fathers and the fallen angels from whose bloodline they originated, but other tribes pledged their allegiance to the deity known to them as the King of the Law, who would one day be referred to by humans as the Great I Am, the God of the Old Testament. And so the giants created their own perverse kingdoms where they taught men the ways of wickedness and dark magic. Meanwhile, their 𝐏𝐢𝐻𝐸𝐻 fathers, having the ability to assume many forms, led the nations astray into sacrificing to demons as gods. When the goodness of man was all but gone, the King of the Law's hand was forced. He sent a great flood to cleanse the earth of wickedness, splintering the earth into 7 separate realms. As punishment for their actions, the 200 𝐏𝐢𝐻𝐸𝐻s that interbred with the daughters of men were caged in a realm of darkness, to be kept there until Judgment Day, a realm called the Dark Abyss. The seers foretold that every being not found in the Book of Life would one day be cast into the lake of black fire. So, from that day on, the fallen 𝐏𝐢𝐻𝐸𝐻s, whether formless or not, were called Abyssians, for that would be their fate. Also, at this time, the fairies and many of the nature folk were cast into the world of Arethusa, including Galador, first of the forest dragons. But many tribes, both good and evil, escaped the great flood by retreating beneath the earth, and when the waters finally subsided, those tribes who had remained loyal to the King of the Law, which consisted of elves and dwarves, were led by a powerful seer to a new world, the world of Eloria. But the other tribes, who worshipped demons as gods, sought to destroy them before they could escape the world of man known as Midland. Eventually, the elves and dwarves made it to Eloria, but not without many sacrifices. They found Eloria to be a rich and plentiful world, but it was also wild and untamed. Many strange beasts inhabited the land, beasts that existed only before the Great Flood. But as their technology progressed, they tamed the world of Eloria by the magic of iron. Elves and dwarves spread throughout the land, seeking wealth and prosperity, hoping to stake their claim on the vast fortunes beneath the earth. Large deposits of gold and silver were found, but gemstones became the heart of Eloria's wealth. Caverns of diamond, sapphire, ruby, fire opal, topaz, and amethyst were all in great abundance. Yet, despite these riches, no element was more sought after than firestone, the rarest of all things, which contained the very essence of creation. Laws were passed to protect this rare and mysterious element. It was both deadly and life-giving, capable of being used for purposes yet to be conceived. Meanwhile, back in the world of Midland, some of the giants had also escaped the Great Flood by retreating underground, and 4 years later they emerged from their caves. But with hardly any resources, they were forced to battle each other for the remnants of Midland, a war which lasted many decades. By the time it was over, humanity had repopulated the earth, and with the covenant of the King of the Law, they were invincible. Their strength and wisdom covered the 4 corners, Without their Abyssian fathers, the giants were outmatched and could only corrupt humanity from the safety of shadows, preying on the weak. For hundreds of years they interbred with humans, teaching dark magic just as their fathers had taught them, and again creation was corrupted, giving rise to the orcs and trolls. But the covenant of the King of the Law had made men strong enough to battle the giants and their abominable offspring. With God on their side, humans could no longer be convinced to worship trees and stones and demons as gods. Out of sheer desperation, the giants summoned the fallen angel Abaddon to help them gather up an army and open a portal to Erebos, the King of the Law's heavenly realm. The Abyssians wanted to usurp the King of the Law's throne, but because the giants and their abominations were not formless, they needed to open a portal. Abaddon and his Abyssians could not conquer Erebos without an army, so the giants rallied up an army of orcs, trolls, goblins, dark elves, werewolves, ogres, and other abominations. But because the Abyssians were formless, they had to rely on the magic of giants, and their skills were far from perfect. Not only that, but the Abyssians were unaware that when the earth was flooded, it had splintered into 7 separate realms, one of which was Eloria. And so, instead of opening a portal to Erebos, they opened a portal to Eloria instead. But the portal was weak, and only a handful of smoke demons had time to enter through, along with the giants and other abominations, before the portal closed. Once inside the world of Eloria, Abaddon and his smoke demons were no longer bound by the formlessness placed upon them in the human world, and were once again able to take physical form, with Abaddon taking the form of a red dragon. And so began the Great War of Eloria. For 1,271 years the elves and dwarves had lived in peace, having divided the lands evenly. They had mastered great technologies and forged the magic of steel. They had made their wealth by mining gold, silver, and gemstones, and the capital of Eloria had since become known as the Sapphire City. Despite all this, it wasn't enough to stop the Red Dragon and his army from carving out a path of destruction across the land. Many towns and cities were either destroyed or abandoned, some of which would never be inhabited again. As the Great War continued, the fairies from the world of Arethusa entered Eloria by a new gateway and joined the battle, siding with the Red Dragon. Many creatures from the fairy realm infested Eloria, including Spriggans, Fauns, and Galador, first of the forest dragons. But many of the nature folk did not agree with the Fairy Queen's new alliance and sought shelter in a great forest which they named the Forest of Danann. When the Wildwood Rangers discovered the effect that iron has on fairies, they weaponized small filings, causing the fairies to retreat back to Arethusa. The Red Dragon then sent his most destructive allies, the Fomorian giants, which were a subspecies of giant more powerful than ordinary ones, to wage war against the kingdom of Stonehill, a dwarf stronghold in the northeast. When the stronghold was about to fall, the steward of Eloria, the great elf general Balinor Centaurian, dispatched a troop of knights to aid the dwarves. There were many losses, but the giants were eventually defeated and the kingdom of Stonehill was saved. But the main army of abominations, having just conquered the dwarf kingdoms of the north, Silversmith and Ironfall, were heading southward towards the Sapphire City with the Red Dragon flying overhead. The Red Dragon's army had suffered the loss of the Dark Elves, which at the time were believed to have been completely wiped out. This caused many abominations to defect, including the ogres and werewolves, which were among the Red Dragon's most valuable allies. The dragon's wrath was greater than ever, and no one was spared as his flaming breath burned every village he encountered. The steward of the Sapphire City, Balinor Centaurian, devised a plan to try and cut the head off the snake by splitting his army in half. He gave command of half his army to Captain Godfrey Starborn, a well-respected knight, and ordered him to attack the army of abominations, which now mostly consisted of orcs and trolls, while he led the remaining forces against the Red Dragon. Godfrey did as he was ordered. He led his half of the army and charged into the orcs' defensive lines and crushed them into oblivion. After defeating the Red Dragon's army, causing them to retreat and disperse, Captain Starborn and what was left of his knights and foot soldiers looked to rejoin the main army and help the general slay the red dragon. When they arrived on the scene, the general's men were being decimated by the beast. Its breath was a firestorm. When the flames settled, there was nothing but ash. It would take more than strength of arms to kill a beast of such power. Upon the advice of a seer, Captain Starborn sent what was left of his troops to aid the general. Then he rode south into the forest, seeking a reclusive dwarf who, unbeknownst to him, had just been anointed as a powerful seer. The dwarf's name was 𝐏𝐢𝐩𝐞𝐫'𝐬, and he gave Godfrey a sword of magic which held incredible power. Upon returning to the battlefield, they were shocked to find the imperial army gone, with the dragon now feasting on the ashes of the dead. General Santorian had ordered the retreat, only he himself had stayed behind. He was half burnt and barely alive, but like a phoenix rising from the ashes, he made one final charge at the beast. Sadly, the dragon saw him coming, and in one fell swoop the beast opened its jaws, snatched him up, and devoured him. Godfrey let out a cry of shame. Eloria had lost its greatest general. So he charged down the hill, and when the red dragon came for him, 𝐏𝐢𝐩𝐞𝐫'𝐬 used his staff of power to fire bolts of blue lightning from the hilltop. With the beast distracted, Godfrey used the magic sword to open a portal into the human world. In Midland, the beast would again become formless, and Eloria would be spared. After wounding one of the dragon's eyes, Godfrey watched the beast stumble backwards into a dark void with the portal closing behind it, and that's how the Great War of Eloria finally ended. By the time the main character Jack Campbell arrives on the scene in Book 1, the world of Eloria has been inhabited for 4,323 years. During that time, the elves and dwarves have survived the Great War when the Red Dragon and his army entered Eloria. They have also survived the 500 Years' War, known as the Winter Campaign, when the orcs united once again and tried to conquer the land. But now, with the arrival of the last Shadar, the inhabitants of Eloria will face their greatest challenge, for Jack's arrival is indeed a sign of dark days ahead, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel. In the third part of this video series called Introducing Eloria Part 3 Inhabitants, you will learn more about the elves and dwarves and other main races of Eloria, including the orcs, trolls and goblins. You will also learn about some of the minor races, including the fairies, dark elves, brownies, werewolves, ogres, and the vast array of nature folk. You will learn about the beasts of Eloria, including dragons, unicorns, sea serpents, giant spiders, snow wolves, and many others. Finally, you will learn more about the Trinitarian God of Eloria, known as the King of the Law, the High King of Creation, and the Spirit of the King.